What is going on, everyone? Welcome to the Bats Cave. This is the pop culture podcast where I talk about everything in the world of comics, movies, video games, TV shows, and more. I'm your host, Alex Bats. Joining me today for the first time actually on this podcast, I have a guest with me, is the graphic design guru himself. He's the man responsible for the Bats Cave logo, all of my YouTube thumbnails, and so much more. I have Sean Hussey joining me. So how are you doing, man?
I'm good. That was such a kind introduction. I was not prepared for that. That was so nice of you. Wow. Thank you.
I'd been thinking about it. I was like, I gotta have a good intro. Because, I mean, you really are, like, you've helped me with so much stuff in regards to basically all of my accounts and all my the stuff that I've done. So had to shout that out.
Wow. That was so nice. Oh, my God.
Yeah, I got you. But yeah, so before we get into the main topic that we're talking about today, I had like two things I wanted to say. One is that I will be uploading the podcast episodes to YouTube again, starting with this one. There won't be any like webcam or fancy video footage with it. It'll just be a still image, but they'll be on YouTube in case you want to watch them or listen to them there. So I'll be doing that again. And then the other thing is that I will be doing a Last of Us Part 2 review episode in the near future. Probably next week is when I'll do that one, because I have lots to say about that game. So that episode is coming up on the horizon. But for the here and now, we have some interesting Batman and Flash related news to talk about. So dates are hard. I think it was actually like a week ago.
Yeah, sounds about right. Last Thursday or Friday.
I'm pulling up it was exactly 1 week ago.
Okay.
So last Monday. Well, the time that we were recording this, you're hearing this a little bit after we recorded, but June 22nd, news broke from The Wrap. Actually, they got this exclusive that Michael Keaton is in talks to play Bruce Wayne / Batman in Ezra Miller's Flash solo film. So the gist of what that article and then the subsequent articles from Deadline and THR and all the various outlets is saying is that he's in talks to return. The plot will introduce general audiences to the idea of the multiverse, and that it's also possible that Keaton will reprise the role for multiple film projects after this, with Batgirl possibly being one of them. That was at least mentioned. That one was mentioned. I think THR said that in their article. So yeah, this is super interesting. I wanted to. What do you think about this, Sean? Because I have thoughts about this, but we've talked about this some a little bit. But I'm curious, what are your like kind of extended thoughts about Michael Keaton possibly being Batman again, and especially in the Flash movie? Like, what do you think about this news in general?
Yeah, no, I mean, we've talked about this a lot with a bunch of other people. I don't think you and I have really sat down and kind of talked about it yet, so it's really cool that we get to talk about it here. I like Michael Keaton's Batman. I've seen Batman 89. I have not seen Batman Returns. I know. Shame on me.
You're not missing much.
But I thought he did a really good job with the character. And, obviously with him returning to the role of Vulture, or not returning to the role, but taking on the role of Vulture, and, with him returning for that role in Morbius, like, obviously he's willing to jump back into this sort of comic book property sort of universe with Marvel. And now to see him come back as Batman, or possibly coming back anyway, is really exciting. Obviously when you're dealing with a topic like Flashpoint, and we're going to get into this, I'm sure, you're dealing with characters like Thomas Wayne, who might not be showing up, or, Bruce, but it's typically a much younger version of Bruce. So obviously they're taking a lot of different approaches to the Flashpoint idea, bringing in a lot of different inspiration. But, to see Keaton come back is very exciting. And I think that he will bring something very different than someone like Affleck would, or even like Jeffrey Dean Morgan if they brought back Thomas Wayne. And I think it's a really interesting approach. I'm not sure if I think it's the best approach, but I think it's going to bring people to the theater to see the Flash movie, and I think that's obviously what they're aiming for.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that might be the biggest thing, is that like Keaton coming back as Batman is such a huge draw for like everyone. I know I've seen some people that are very not on board with that and like not excited about like Keaton coming back as Batman, but at the same time, like I already know they're going to be seeing it in the theater, which I mean they would probably do regardless, but like that'll get a lot of people that maybe would not have been interested otherwise to go see that movie, because whether or not you really like him in that role, it's hard to argue that he wasn't iconic as Batman. Like, that is Batman for a lot of people. And so, yeah, it's really interesting. I'm very excited at the prospect of Keaton being in the cape and cowl again. I love Batman 89, as I kind of mentioned a minute ago. I'm not a huge fan of Batman Returns. I appreciate it. I think it's pretty okay. But I'm still, like, as a Batman fan, it's just really crazy to think about the fact that we could, I'm going to go ahead and say, we'll likely be seeing Keaton again. I feel like this, cause what we know is that it's in early talks, so, you know, nothing is final. But at the same time, I kind of feel like if the fact that we know about this and then we know that these talks are happening, I feel like WB is going to do everything that they can to make sure that that deal closes. And so, because like that's a lot that they're putting just in that idea, and so I'm pretty confident that we'll actually see this happen, which I guess now I'll be let down if it doesn't. But it's super exciting just to think about that and think about seeing his Batman again. We've gotten subsequent things in in recent days about like what kind of suit he'd be wearing and stuff like that. Apparently he might be wearing something related to like Kingdom Come, or looking sort of like that, which is just like an armor that helps him, which would make sense because he's, you know, definitely older now. But yeah, I think it's really, there's just so much there that you can do. I don't think his Batman will have had a lot of experience with other heroes and stuff if he shows up, but yeah, I don't want to get too sidetracked. You mentioned Flashpoint, and just the fact that they're doing Flashpoint, and that they're doing it in a different direction and a different take than what we know Flashpoint to be, which is something that the director Andy, I don't know how to pronounce his last name.
Muschietti.
Yeah,
something like that.
I have no idea, but he has actually said that was like one of the first things he said whenever he came on to the film, is that like, one, they are like doing Flashpoint, but he was like, it's not the Flashpoint that people know. And I know like a lot of people are really apprehensive about them doing Flashpoint for the first Flash film, which I get. But at the same time, I feel like, I mean, we have like no context for anything. Literally, we have no context for anything that could be happening in this film as of right now. And I think that it's going to be extremely different than what the Flashpoint comic is. I think basically the only similarity is that Flash will be traveling in the Speed Force and end up in an alternate timeline or an alternate Earth, and he may or may not have even been trying to save his mother, like in this. And so the fact that they're using this movie to introduce the general audience to the multiverse, which one, so this is something that I've actually been kind of vocal and slightly annoyed about on Twitter, because I've seen a lot of people say that like this is super complicated, for like the idea of the multiverse and everything is, you know, really complicated, and that like quote unquote us comic fans like get it, but like general audiences will be confused. And like, I don't really think it's that confusing. I feel like the concept and the idea of a multiverse and like alternate Earths is pretty simple to explain. Like, it can be very complicated if you really go into like the science of stuff, but just like literally, even if someone has like never heard of the idea of a multiverse or like alternate Earths before, literally all you have to be like, oh yeah, there's just an alternate universe with different Earths, and like there you go. Like, that's pretty, you've explained it, it's done. And so I really don't feel, I feel like some people aren't giving general audiences enough credit when it comes to that. And then the other thing is that, one, it's not too complicated to explain, and two, it doesn't really matter if the general audience like gets it or wants to understand it, because most people are just going to watch these movies because they want to be entertained, and like they either don't care about all the lore and everything that goes into it, and so then it just doesn't matter, or they do care, and if they do care, they'll search it up and try to figure it out for themselves, and so then problem solved. So like I feel like some people are just creating a problem that isn't there whenever they're talking about that kind of stuff, because like we now know, like when this news came out, it's saying that, one, just the introduction of Keaton in the first place is, you know, solidifying the fact that DC is embracing the multiverse for all of their live action properties, which already happened with the Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover, because Ezra Miller's Flash showed up on that TV show. but just the fact that they're going more full force with that. And I lost my train of thought. So they're doing that, and which is great. I completely lost it. Absolutely lost it.
It happens. It happens to the best of us.
But yeah, so they're doing that, which I think is exciting. I completely lost. What do you think about the fact that they're bringing the multiverse back, or like they're really embracing the multiverse, like with this?
I think it's smart, especially considering that it's actually kind of the one avenue that Marvel hasn't done yet. And this isn't going to turn into a whole like, oh, is DC just trying to copy Marvel or do something different? And like that whole conversation has really gone away, especially in the last couple of years. DC's really found their footing. But I do think it's smart that they're exploring an area that DC or Marvel hasn't really touched yet. I think that that's going to separate them, regardless of the discourse that's happened in the communities about it, to the general public, the comparisons are going to be made. To general audiences, they're going to walk into a DC movie and still try to compare it to a Marvel movie just because that's what Marvel movies are, and Marvel movies are the biggest movies in the world right now. So to do something where you're like, oh, well, he's not, time traveling, like they did in Endgame, which he might do some time traveling. Who knows? He's, rather exploring different and alternate Earths is, definitely something that's going to separate DC. And by bringing in all sorts of different characters and different Bat figures, Keaton, we've seen some rumblings about possibly Bale showing up. So, just bringing in all these different characters and versions of the same characters is going to be something that's very different for the multiverse and something that's really good. Something you mentioned, too, that I didn't even think about was that by changing the whole idea of Flashpoint, like, Barry might not even be doing this to save his mother. And, like, that hadn't even crossed my mind of, like, what his motivation behind this might be. And I think it would almost make more sense. I guess it depends on what we see. Maybe there's more of this developed in Zack Snyder's Justice League. But the whole idea of, like, we haven't really explored that side of Barry Allen and his mother in the DCEU yet. And to see that maybe he's just testing the waters with whether it be, like, the cosmic treadmill or whatever, and he accidentally creates Flashpoint. That's also just as interesting, to me at least, as him trying to go back and saving his mother, because the core of Flashpoint is really the alternate reality that he ends up creating and not really the emotional side of it. It's important, and he learns a very good lesson throughout the Flashpoint about how you can't save everyone. But at the same time, like, the core and what fans are looking forward to about Flashpoint is that alternate Earth, alternate reality that Barry ends up creating. And I think that's going to be really key to the whole thing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I just think I think it's really interesting that we don't, and just like I said, we don't know like what's going on with that. And I think that it's exciting that I love the fact that they're doing something different with it, because like I love seeing adaptations of stuff on the screen, of course, whether it be animated or live action, because it's very cool to see, like our favorite stories brought to life in, whatever way. But at the same time, and I've always said this, I really like whenever creators just take certain like little bits from those stories and like make their own thing from it, because I'd rather have more often than not like a brand new experience with these characters. Like if I want to see Flashpoint, like I'll read Flashpoint, or I'll watch the animated movie. Is a pretty faithful adaptation of the comic. It's honestly really, really close. So I think it's cool that they're taking basically the core concepts of Flashpoint but just changing it really significantly actually at this point. Like if we don't get, because at first for a while before this news came out, actually even a couple days like before this news came out, there was some significant rumblings that we would be getting Jeffrey Dean Morgan back as Flashpoint Batman, and we would be seeing him, which I also think would be really exciting. And so now there's been reports that he's no longer in the script, or that he never was in the script, that he's not coming back, which is interesting. This is part of the tangent with the whole multiverse thing that I was gonna get to, is that DC really embracing the multiverse side of things. Like the inclusion of Keaton, as I said, does that, and it makes it to where like everything that you could want to do with DC's live action stuff, you can now. Like, you don't really have to worry about what is and isn't canon, like, quote unquote, because it all works. You can just put it on a different Earth if you really want to. And so, like, we know that the main DCEU, so like Aquaman, Wonder Woman. I'm gonna put Zack Snyder's Justice League as more so canon than what we got. Like Man of Steel, BVS, like that's the Suicide Squad, Birds of Prey. That's Shazam. Yeah, that's all like one. That's the main DCEU like Earth, and then we know that Joker is like its own thing, but we also can now like infer that Joker is just a part of the multiverse that DC has, and so that's just its own thing. And we know that Matt Reeves and Robert Pattinson's Batman films will be their own thing. They'll be like standalone, and then now we have Keaton's movies that are their own thing, but Keaton's going to be brought into the fold. And so it just makes it to where you have all these different properties that can exist on their own merits, but that it just also, if creators and if the studio wants it to happen and if everyone involved is like down, you can have crossover between whatever you want, basically, because that's just how the multiverse works. It happens all the time in DC Comics on the comic side of things. We just get this really cool crossover, and it just is really nice to see. It's something that's not essential, but it just makes it to where everything kind of works. And so I think that that's really cool to see. And so it also makes it to where, like, even if we don't get Jeffrey Dean Morgan as Flashpoint Batman, like in the Flashpoint movie, like you could straight up make a Flashpoint. You wouldn't call it Flashpoint at this point, because I assume that this Flash movie is going to be called Flashpoint. It'll probably be like the Flashpoint with the subtitle. But you could straight up make like a movie that is the standard Flashpoint universe that we see from that story, where it is like Bruce dies in the alley instead of his parents, and we get Jeffrey Dean Morgan and Lauren Cohan as Batman and Joker on like that. You can make that movie still with what DC is doing now with the multiverse, and like it would work. It's just a different Earth. And so you can do that with everything basically. And their live action library now. You can do whatever story you want, and you can choose to have them cross over or to like not have them cross over with things. And so I think that's really exciting. There's been rumblings. I don't know if I want to get into this topic yet. But yeah, so I just think there's so much possibility there, which I think is really cool. The other major thing that they said with this that goes hand in hand with Keaton coming back is the fact that he would be returning for more than one film. Like he wouldn't just be in this movie, and that they would set him up as a sort of like mentor-like figure, kind of how the comparison that was made was similar to Nick Fury in the MCU. So what are your thoughts on him coming back for more than one movie and kind of filling that role? And people have said that he would be like quote unquote replacing Ben Affleck's Batman as the main Batman in this universe. So what are your thoughts on that and that whole angle?
Yeah, I think that's where I start to like kind of get a little concerned. Is I think that it's very interesting to bring in this, older Michael Keaton Batman and have him serve a role in a sense similar to what Thomas Wayne was in Flashpoint. I think that that's smart. I think it's at least from a marketing standpoint, it's much smarter than trying to bring back Jeffrey Dean Morgan as Thomas Wayne from that one scene in Batman v Superman, which people probably don't even remember that much when it comes to general audiences. And while Jeffrey Dean Morgan now, thanks to being on, The Walking Dead, like, he's a pretty big name, and he would probably sell tickets. Like, no one's going to sell tickets like 1989 Batman and Michael Keaton. But what makes Thomas Wayne Batman so great, at least in Flashpoint, and I know in more recent comics they've brought him to main continuity and they're kind of playing around with that a little bit more, of having him be more involved. But at least from the beginning, when Flashpoint happened, Thomas Wayne Batman and that older Batman mentor figure was in Flashpoint, and then it was just done. So the idea of bringing Keaton over as sort of this Nick Fury figure and having him interact with more players, the DCEU, and more characters, and I don't know. I mean, like, it could work, obviously. I think that having some sort of overarching figure through all these movies and having, like, a through line is going to be good and probably very helpful and help audiences connect things better, just like Nick Fury helped connect the Avengers movies back in the day. I'm just not sure if this version of Batman should be that person. I don't even know if you need it necessarily. If you're going to do it, obviously if Ben Affleck is not going to come back, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about that later. But if Ben Affleck's not going to come back as Batman, like, I feel like Keaton's the way to go. Or, again, you kind of do what Birds of Prey did, where you're like, Batman's not really around right now. And, that's okay. I think that's, respectful to Affleck that way. I also think it's respectful to Affleck to have another Bat come in and kind of take the reins of the DCEU. I just think it's weird, but I think it could work.
Yeah, so my thoughts on that. So, one, I don't think that he would be like, because I know people have said, like, oh, I don't want him replacing Ben Affleck's Batman. And, like, I feel like replacing is the wrong word here, because it's not like he would be doing what Ben Affleck's Batman would be doing if he stayed around, Like, he's not, I mean, we apparently will be seeing him in the Batsuit and stuff, but it's in such a different capacity character-wise. Like, those two Batman, granted we haven't seen, Keaton's old Batman, but, like, I would imagine that they're just in very different places as characters. And so, like, I just feel like, I don't know, replacing, like, rub me the wrong way. I don't think that is what would be happening. I do think that it would be really interesting, though, to see him. I would obviously be more interested in how he would fold into any Batman related titles that we would be seeing. Like, the project they mentioned would be Batgirl. I feel like that would make sense there. Like, if he's, helping Batgirl or just appears in a Batgirl movie, I could see that. I personally, the one that I would be pulling for, which this would even go, I don't know. They could do it, obviously, with multiverse and, timelines and things. I would love to see Keaton in a Batman Beyond movie. That's something that people have said people have wanted for years on the internet. Like, everyone wants Michael Keaton to play old Batman or old Bruce Wayne in a Batman Beyond movie. I've been one of the people for a long time that, like, I don't think that he's necessary if you're going to do a Batman Beyond movie. I would like to see Kevin Conroy in that. But, like, if you're going to bring Keaton back and he's going to be this mentor-like figure and be in multiple movies, like, then at that point, why the hell would you not do a live-action Batman Beyond movie with him? I just really want to see a Batman Beyond movie at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And so, like, that's what that comes down to. And I feel like this sort of opens the door for making it a little bit more possible. So that would be cool. But yes, him being, like, a mentor-like figure, I don't know. It's interesting because I can't really see, like, when I think of him being the quote-unquote, like, Batman of the main Earth in the DCEU, I have a hard time picturing him, like, standing in, like, a group shot with the Justice League.
Exactly.
Yeah,
no.
Like, I can't see that. And which, to be fair, is not what the descriptor they're giving is. Like, you don't see Nick Fury in the group shot with the Avengers,
Right.
So, like, that goes into the point that I was making, where, like, he's not filling the role that Ben Affleck's Batman would have had if he stayed around. And so it just really, like, I'd be excited and interested to see more of him in more projects, specifically Bat-related ones. I think that could work really well. As far as seeing him in other, like, heroes movies, that is where it gets a little, like, it really depends on how you use him, and you got to be really careful there. As far as, like, what I would like to see and be okay with seeing for him. Because at a point I'd be like, okay, you're kind of maybe stretching it a little bit. Like, I don't know. So yeah, I don't know. It's very interesting.
I was going to say,
just crazy.
Yeah,
go
on. Sorry. I just was, thinking about sort of that Nick Fury comparison. I guess the reason that, like, I would have used the word sort of replace is, I guess, one, we didn't really see Ben Affleck's Batman obviously he didn't get his own standalone movie. And we really saw him, in BVS and then kind of Suicide Squad and then what we got of him in Justice League and hopefully.
Sorry, what movie?
Exactly. But I think about and I look at what Affleck and that version of Bruce was doing in the DCEU, and obviously a lot of his character motivation was after Batman v Superman anyway, was I have to assemble this Justice League and, like, I'm going to assemble this team. And I think about how he cameoed in, Suicide Squad and even sort of what he did in the beginning of Justice League, where, like, he kind of pops up here and there and, like, he's kind of getting in everybody's business as Bruce Wayne would. and kind of interfering with Amanda Waller and the Suicide Squad. And obviously, like, he's the one who recruits, you know, both Ezra as Flash and then Jason as Aquaman. And I just think about how, like, that's kind of what Nick Fury did, was, like, he kind of just kept popping up in movies and, like, talking to people about the Avengers Initiative. And I guess that's kind of where that comparison was. And, like, obviously I don't expect Keaton's Batman to be standing there with the Justice League and, like, fighting crime in Gotham as, like, the Batman.
Yeah.
But when I thought about, you know, Nick Fury role, I was calling back to more of what Affleck was doing in those cameos that he had in sort of the early Justice League stuff, where, like, he is doing the recruiting and he is kind of stringing all these movies together, and he's sort of this interconnected web that is touching different places and different spots and different characters, and kind of reminding everyone that this is all one big universe, so that, you know, there are strings being pulled behind the scenes.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, and that does he very much did fit that role in the post BVS and like beginning of Justice League movie that we got. I fucking hate mentioning that movie. God, I can't stand that. Okay, so you know what? Well, let's just go ahead and talk about it. We mentioned him a couple times already. So Ben Affleck's Batman. The other thing that's been talked about for a long time, we got a report. It was a couple months ago at this point, I feel. That because it was like right after Zack Snyder's Justice League was announced, and the fact that that's happening, and so apparently AT&T and WB, like, they want Ben Affleck back as Batman, and I've talked about this a lot on Twitter. I talked about this on the podcast when I mentioned the announcement of Zack Snyder's Justice League. One, the most important factor that just in general when it comes to this is, like, Ben has to want to do this. Like, if he doesn't want to do this, he absolutely obviously should not, and, like, that's the number one thing to take into consideration. And, like, I see a lot of fans saying, like, oh, he deserves his, like, ending for his Batman, or to, like, have his solo movie or an HBO Max series and things like that, and, like, oh, AT&T WB, like, give this to him, and, like, which, like, I get, but at the same time, like, he's said, as far as we know publicly, what he has said recently is that he, like, lost the heart of playing that role and, like, doing those kinds being superhero and comic book films, and that he's happier now not doing that and doing different kinds of projects. So, like, that's the last thing that he has publicly said on the subject that we know, and that's what's important. And so I feel like when it comes to him coming back, like, I'm not super hopeful that he would come back, but it's interesting because after Zack Snyder's Justice League was announced, we know now that we're going to be seeing the proper continuation, possibly conclusion of his Batman in this movie, because what was originally going to happen in Zack's Justice League at the end of his Justice League story, I don't know if this would have been in the first movie, but at the very end of it all, like, we know that Batman was supposed to sacrifice himself to save Lois and Superman and defeat Darkseid. That was going to be the completion of his character arc. So he was going to die. And so I don't know if we'll be seeing that in Zack Snyder's Justice League, because we know a pretty decent amount about the movie. At least I thought that we knew a lot about the movie, but recently Zack has said that we, like, haven't seen anything in regards to that film, and we don't know that much. So I'm a little bit confused now. But so I think that's one thing that's really interesting as far as another Batman coming in, is that, one, it depends on where in continuity they want to place Zack Snyder's Justice League. Like, they could, depending on how events go in that movie and how different things would be at the end, which, to be fair, Aquaman, apparently, as far as what Momoa said whenever that movie came out, like, was, like, Zack Snyder's Justice League was canon to Aquaman. So, like, I would assume that no event is going to be big enough to change what happens in that movie. But I feel like Batman's the biggest, like, factor that might change here, especially with what they're doing now in regards to, because the one thing is, like, okay, well, if they continue this, like, are they gonna just never acknowledge Ben Affleck's Batman in future movies, or, like, what happened to him, like, kind of like what you mentioned for Birds of Prey, like, oh, Batman's just out there somewhere. And so my biggest thing is like, okay, well, we don't know if he's gonna die or not by the end of that movie, and so that really, would change things. But then if he doesn't, a lot of people want him to come back for an HBO series, which, for the record, I would fucking love. I would love it if he came back for an HBO series. And I think that the only reason that he would consider doing that is because one of the reasons that the role was so draining for him is because when you're Batman, and we're seeing this with Robert Pattinson now, which Pattinson is dealing with it very well because he just doesn't give a fuck what people think, which is great. But is that there's so much pressure on whoever is playing Batman, because like that's fucking Batman. Like that's such a big role. I literally cannot imagine what kind of pressure that it like puts on someone, because just all eyes are you. Like you're the next like Batman. I can't even begin to imagine that. And so he just had all that pressure on him that was just constantly weighing him down. His first, outing as Batman was obviously like not well received, mixed reviews at best. Like a lot of people said that he was like great in the role, but then a lot of people are like, oh, I fucking hate him so much, like worst thing. And so, he had that dealing with, and then he had the pressure of the Solo movie, and so all of that. And so I think now, if he were to do like an HBO series, one of the reasons I think that he might be okay with that is because at this point, and especially now with this Keaton news, like he's not the sole Batman that we're seeing anymore. Like we're getting Robert Pattinson as Batman. He's our big screen Batman now. Like, because even what we're seeing of Zack Snyder's Justice League, like that's on a streaming service. You're not seeing him in theaters. So like Robert Pattinson has that spotlight on him. And so like all the pressure isn't on Ben anymore, which I think is a really big factor. And then also if he were to do that, I think that they would give him his own like creative space to do what he wanted to do, like, or whatever he wanted to do in that. And so I feel like it would just be a lot more contained, he would have a lot more control over it. It'd be less pressure and things like that. I made an even longer winded discussion about this argument in my past podcast, but like, so I feel like that's a possibility that could happen. And so then, then if we do somehow end up, because I don't even have that much faith that this is going to happen or that this will happen, but like if we somehow do end up getting more Batfleck besides in Justice League, I don't know how they would work that in with like if that would be on a different Earth technically that they would make that, or like how everything would fit together, which again you can now because obviously what they're doing timelines in the multiverse. But I don't know, I just think the whole thing is really interesting. So that's my long-winded thing. What do you think about like Ben Affleck's Batman and his like state or position in the DCEU?
That was so much. I'm so proud.
I know.
Of you. I'm so proud. Of you.
I was trying to keep going because I was like, man, I'm talking for a long time.
It's
Sean's
okay.
not being able to say anything.
Don't worry about it. I mean, we've talked about this at length. You and I share a lot of the same thoughts. Of course, obviously, I want to preface it's up to Ben. Ben needs to do what's best for him. Ben is a person just like you and I, and just like everybody listening. People struggle. People need to do what's best for them. That being said, I trust the reports that we've heard. We've also heard reports, that if Affleck wants to come back, which of course, the reports say AT&T and Warner Brothers want him to, that Jared Leto would be interested in coming back as well, and Joe Manganiello would be interested in coming back as well as Deathstroke. And obviously that all plays a factor. Obviously Margot Robbie's still kicking ass as Harley Quinn. Probably with her schedule, there's probably not even and current character arc. She's probably not going to be with the Joker anyway. But it leaves the door open. That being said, I don't know if Ben's going to come back. I believe that Warner Brothers and AT&T want him back. I absolutely do. I'm not sure if Ben will do it. I think that he, obviously, I don't know Ben Affleck. You don't know Ben Affleck.
Hey, I've talked to him.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Yeah, that one convention.
I talked to him 2 times. Thank you very much.
I apologize. But obviously, not knowing Ben Affleck, but you see what the press puts out, and you see what the paparazzi shoot, and he looks happy. He looks healthy. He's in a very nice relationship, it seems. I'm happy for him. I'm not sure that he would want to come back. You mentioned that interview. I think he did it with Vanity Fair, talking about sort of his production experience as Batman and where he stood. And, he was very PR friendly about it, but he basically said he really enjoyed working with Zack Snyder, and the behind the scenes issues that happened with Justice League sucked, and that he just did not enjoy that process as much, and it kind of lost the taste in his mouth for all sorts of comic book movies. Maybe we still are getting conflicting reports about whether or not Zack Snyder's Justice League is going to be able to have additional shooting. Zack has seemed to tease that he will. Certain reports are saying that he won't. I'd rather trust Zack than the trades. But assuming that Zack Snyder's Justice League needs additional filming and Ben would like to return, maybe that would ignite some sort of spark. But deep down, I think that Ben is probably done with that role. It's probably something he's considering, but I think that he'll ultimately decide that Robert Pattinson is Batman now. They've moved on. It's time for him to move on as well. For me, I'm much more interested in what that means for the character of Bruce Wayne as we know him in the DCEU. Obviously they've gotten away with it in Birds of Prey, with, just not really mentioning Batman in Gotham. I can't remember if they directly reference him or not in terms of like where he is or what he's doing. I know they make a couple jokes about the Bat. And as we know from Shazam, like obviously the Justice League is being marketed. We see the Batman action figures and whatever. So obviously these are characters that are now made a pretty big impact on the world around them. And I think it's hard for you to just drop that character, even if you have Keaton coming in to, replace quote unquote him.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see. I don't think they're gonna kill him off, obviously, if he didn't want to return. But I feel like you're going to have to find some sort of explanation as to where the DCEU Bruce Wayne has gone, as we know it. And maybe, God knows what Zack has planned for his Justice League. He said that we have barely seen the tip of the iceberg for what is going to be in it. For all we know, he could be recompiling the movies to fit both Justice League 1 and 2. For all we know, Ben could sign back on board and say, you know what? Let's finish your movie, Zack. I will sacrifice my, character's life at the end of this movie. And the DCEU moves forward with a sacrifice at the hands of Ben Affleck's Batman. And then we just go from there, and Keaton is now our DCEU Batman, sort of avenging the memory of his otherworldly self. We really don't know, but I don't think that you can sit there and just have, obviously Ben Affleck's a big movie star, obviously that version of Batman, while divisive at first, is now fairly well received and well liked, I think.
Aside from the one complaint that we always get, yes. Which I'm not.
We're not getting into that.
I'm not doing it.
I think that you're going to have to answer that question of like, what happened to Ben's Batman, and if he doesn't return, obviously. And from there, who knows? Maybe he went to go visit some friends in the League of Shadows or something.
Yeah, I don't know. That's the most interesting thing to me, because I completely agree. Like, you have to acknowledge it at some point somehow. Like, it's Bruce Wayne and Batman, and as you said, they've obviously made a huge impact on the world, so there's just, you gotta do something there. So yeah, I can't believe that we apparently have only seen the tip of the iceberg as far as Zack's Justice League, because I really thought that we had a pretty good handle on what that movie was going to be for the most part, like I felt like, based on all the reports and everything that he had said previously, and like what we knew about what his movie was supposed to be, I was like, okay, I got a pretty good gist of like what this 4.5 hour film / possible miniseries is going to be. And I was like, oh, you haven't seen anything. I'm like, okay, well, I got no fucking clue. Like, I don't know. It's so crazy to just think, because I feel like those are the two, like, obviously the biggest factor would be whether or not Ben comes back. That's the huge one. But then the other one is like, which obviously we don't know. And then the other thing that we just don't know is what happens in Zack Snyder's Justice League. Like, And so those are just two huge things that it's so, I can't wait to see like how that plays out, which apparently we have also now learned that they're aiming for a first half of 2021 release for Zack Snyder's Justice League.
Still not sure about that, but I mean, I know that that's what they're saying. I don't know if they're going to hit that, but I hope so.
Well, yeah, because of everything that's happening in the world, obviously.
Yes.
But I mean, yeah, but that's what I don't remember what high up person it was that said. It was someone like in charge though that said that, which is so it's a reliable source that has said they said the first half of 2021 is what they're looking for, which is earlier than what I thought. I thought they were going to do like a fall release for that.
So did I.
So, which, as you just said, is what might end up happening just because of uncontrollable events. But, well, quote unquote uncontrollable. I'm not getting into that. But yeah, so I'm so interested to see like how those things work out, and that'll obviously determine the future of that. But then, yeah, there's just so many variables that they're throwing in now, which I just think is so cool. Like it's just really, I love the fact that DC is finally, like you said it earlier, that they've like found their footing. Which I agree with. I think that I think they only really lost their footing once, and it sucks that it was literally the biggest step that they could have lost their footing on.
Yep.
That being Justice League, because if you follow me, if you listen to this podcast, you'll know I'm a huge fan of both Man of Steel and Batman v Superman and what Zack was doing. I've loved all of the DC films that we've gotten. Like I think Suicide Squad is better than what people give it credit for. It's not a fantastic movie, but I enjoy it, and I love Aquaman, Shazam, Wonder Woman. Like they're all great, and so it just sucks that the biggest step that they like really needed to just nail it, they just absolutely just fucked. Like they just did not do well with that, which is just has sent them on a like course correction sort of. But it's just, we've seen it recently with their recent releases that they've really put faith and they've put stock in letting these creators have an idea for something and just going through with that. Like Aquaman, Shazam, Birds of Prey, and Joker are all such vastly different films, and they all work because of that. And I think that's something that DC really, they've shown that they are doubling down on that. They need to continue to double down on that. And then opening up the multiverse and really embracing that is just a whole other level of doing that. It just gives so much freedom to anyone who wants to tell, because like you can literally have, this is a movie that I've wanted to see for a while and think would be really cool. Like you could literally do a Vandal Savage movie where you just follow him throughout the history of like the planet because he's immortal, and like you could do that as an Elseworlds movie, or you can have it on the main Earth and it would still work. Or you could literally have like a Red Sun Superman film if you wanted to in live action, and it would work now. It could fit. You could do anything, literally anything. There's a multiverse of possibilities for them to do now, and if characters get popular enough, if creators are on board, they can have them cross over, and it doesn't matter because it can work. And I just think that that's really cool and really exciting. I like that it's basically like if you prefer, like if you're a fan of the main DCEU films that we've gotten and you don't like Joker or whatever other movies, like you don't it doesn't matter. You don't have to see those. You don't have to pay attention to those. If you're a fan of the 89 Batman movies, like you're getting more of that now too. Like if you just like the CW shows, like those are their own thing that you can also just see those. But also if you're a fan of all of it, and then there's even the HBO Max like original shows that they're working on now. Like we know we're getting a Green Lanterns show and a Strange Adventures show, and they're making a Justice League Dark show. So like you can get that corner of DC stuff too, and like you can just consume that. But then if you're a fan of everything, like you can, and if you want to get into it, which again it's not needed, it's not necessary, but like if you want to be like really get into it, like all of it can be connected, and like you can just as a DC fan or just as a fan in general, like you can enjoy all of that. And I just think that that's really cool. That's something that's really unique, and I'm very glad that they're doubling down on all of that and really starting to do that. And like you said, they've found their footing and are continuing to, it looks like they're getting in a really, really good stride. So I'm just excited for that in general. I think there's so much potential. So yeah, I can't wait for all of it.
Yeah, for sure.
Go on.
No, I mean, I was going to say, we totally jumped into like the whole Batman thing. But I still think that there's a lot to be said about like what is this? What does this mean for the Flash? Like as a character?
I'm glad you brought. Yeah. Go.
You know, we have a couple friends who are Flash fans, and you know they have expressed some fears, and I've seen it elsewhere. Of this sounds an awful lot like a Batman movie featuring the Flash.
Yeah.
And those concerns are definitely, you know, warranted. I think that, you know, obviously I think the comic did a good job of this, and the movie is pretty much a one-for-one adaptation anyway. But Batman is featured pretty heavily in Flashpoint, and it sounds like that they're going to kind of use at least Keaton's Batman, if not more Batman, to fuel this movie and fuel the whole idea of the multiverse. And you have to kind of wonder, like, at what point does Ezra's Flash get to kind of, you know, shine? Especially since I think that you have to consider, and I'm sure Warner Brothers, you know, thinking about this, the Flash movie was supposed to come out in 2018 originally. Like, when the original DCEU slate released. It's now going to probably come out in 2021, hopefully, depending on how Hollywood and the whole, you know, world.
Is it 2021 or 2022?
It might be 2022, honestly. I was shooting for earlier rather than later. I don't know what the official release date is.
I'm Googling it. Keep going.
Regardless, by the point that the Flash movie releases now, the Flash TV show is probably going to be ending. And even people that I know who don't really read comics or like don't know about, you know, superhero movies, and like, well, maybe go see like an Avengers movie every now and again. People know about the Flash show, and people like the Flash TV show with Grant Gustin. You are going to have a very hard time convincing the general audiences and, you know, even like some hardcore Flash fans that like Ezra's your big screen Flash. Like, people are going to ask questions of like, what about that guy on TV? And like Crisis on Infinite Earths on the CW obviously addressed some of this, and it was very smart by bringing Ezra's Flash in and having him interact with Grant. And, you know, it'd be awesome if we got to see the reverse side of that in the Flash movie. They shot the interaction between the two of them in 2 to 35 to 1 aspect ratio. So, like, you can use it on a big screen if you wanted to, which is super cool. They're probably planning a little bit ahead on that. I'd love to see Grant Gustin show up in the Flash movie at some point. But you have to let Ezra's Flash kind of shine. And then by the time that Flash shows end, you're going to have like 8 seasons of Grant Gustin, and he's going to have hit Flashpoint and Crisis and God knows how many other comic book storylines. I'm not really good with the Flash storylines, but like they had a ton of villains. They obviously did Zoom and Reverse Flash. And
yeah, they've
Godspeed.
done like all,
they've done everybody
basically. Yeah, pretty much.
And they've even done the whole Rogues Gallery practically at this point too. So you have to be able to separate and differentiate Ezra's Flash, which like they're going to probably do a very good job with by introducing the multiverse. It's going to do that, but you have to also be able to give him a spotlight and a position where people still understand this is Ezra's movie and it's Ezra's Flash. And despite how you may feel about him, and I'm not the biggest fan, I think he's okay. I'm hoping that like he'll kind of wow me away in Zack Snyder's Justice League, and I'm looking forward to his movie. But, you know, you have to give Ezra the spotlight, and we still haven't even talked about like how Reverse Flash might factor into all of this too, because obviously if you're adapting Flashpoint, you're probably gonna have Reverse Flash in there somewhere.
It was me, Barry.
Yeah. You know, obviously there's been rumblings of castings and just like, you know, fan casts all over the place between like Matthew McConaughey and, you know,
McConaughey's one I see all the time.
Yeah, McConaughey's a really famous one. I forget his name. I think it's Winston Bethel. It's the guy that plays Bullseye on Daredevil season 3.
Oh yeah, I see. Yeah, I've seen that one.
I see that one a lot. You know, some people think Fassbender would be good. You know,
there's another one I've seen. God.
Yeah.
There's a lot out there.
There's a lot of them. That's, you know. So obviously you kind of have to figure out, you know, how much of a role then does Reverse Flash play? Or are you going to just kind of do the Rogues Gallery? Or are you not going to have another... Or it's like the villain of your movie, the fact that it's like a whole plot line that you have to kind of resolve. Like, is your villain sort of just the other universe that, like, you get swept into? And he's like, I have to fix everything. Like, is that your through line? Because when it comes to a topic like Flashpoint, you don't even need a villain. Like, obviously, like, Reverse Flash becomes the villain because...
He's Reverse Flash.
Yes, he's Reverse Flash, and, like, he killed Barry's mother, and that was the whole reason that, like, Barry went to intervene and whatnot. But, like, if you're not going to have the catalyst for Flashpoint being saving Nora Allen, then you don't even need a villain. You just have Barry doing some shenanigans, gets caught up with Keaton's Batman. Maybe if he goes to Keaton's world, that world's in shambles now. Maybe they both get sent to another world that's very similar to Flashpoint, where, like, the Atlanteans and the Amazonians are at war, and you have to resolve that plot. Like, you don't even need a villain when it comes to Flashpoint. So it'll be very interesting to see where they go. We haven't even talked about also. I'm throwing a lot of things out there for you to respond to.
No, it's good. I like it. Keep going.
The producer, who I believe is the sister of the director, I think Barbara is her name, Barbara Muschietti.
Yeah.
She commented or DM'd a fan on Instagram and, like, confirmed, quote unquote, that Ray Fisher is going to come into the movie at some point and play Cyborg. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of threads here to kind of follow. And again, I feel like if you're not careful, you're going to swallow Ezra's Flash and, like, not allow him the room to breathe and the room to kind of grow and step into the mantle of the Flash. As by the time this ends, probably Grant Gustin's time as the role is going to fall off.
Yeah. You good?
Yeah.
You got your breath?
I'm good.
Yeah, no. So I looked it up. The release date is June 2nd, 2022, as of right now. So we're a little under 2 years away, which will be over 4 years since it was originally going to come out, which, yeah. I saw, yeah, I know we both saw the same tweet, but the fact that, like, Ezra was cast as a Flash, like, a couple weeks after the Flash show premiered, and the Flash show will probably be over by the time he, gets a trailer even for his movie. But yeah, I agree. And I do think that the concern that Flash fans have is warranted and valid. Because, I mean, yeah, like, as important, and we mentioned this, the, like, drawing power that Keaton's Batman will have for this movie if he's in it, like, that's a double-edged sword in the fact that, like, you're putting Michael Keaton's Batman in a movie. It's kind of hard to not have him overpower anything else about that film. Because, I mean, that's a phenomenon right there. So, yeah, that's a very interesting thing. I think the thing that gives me the most faith in him still being able to shine in the movie is the fact that I don't see him not being in, like, basically every scene in the movie, like, especially if you're doing, like, because if you're doing these time travel or otherworldly shenanigans, like, you have to be with Barry for, like, 90 to, like, 95% of that film, like, which I feel, I know Mike might go without saying, but just the fact that, like, he will, even if it's shared screen time with someone like Michael Keaton's Batman, like, he'll be an ever-present figure there. And so that just really then comes down to how you write him, obviously, in the movie, and what Ezra is able to do with that material, which I trust Andy, whose last name I can't say. I think he's a very talented director and writer. I loved both It movies. The first one I would probably agree is stronger. I know a lot of people don't like the second one. I still think it was really good. But so he's a very talented director and storyteller. I'm very happy that he's on the project and that he's doing this. And so I have faith in the direction that he will be taking Flash. I know also that he said, like, one of the things that really draws him to the Flash is his love of family and the core that family has to Flash. And so I think that he's definitely got that emotional part of Flash, like, on lock. I feel like he'll definitely be able to bring that. And so then the flip side of that just becomes selling him as a superhero, essentially, to the general audience and really making him someone that you can see standing beside the rest of the Justice League. And you're like, yeah, like making him someone that is kids' favorite superhero out of that lineup, basically, is, like, something that you have to, because I mean, now, like, obviously people are like, oh, Aquaman's my favorite after his solo movie. And so I feel like that's kind of the goalpost that you got to be trying to reach. Like, you've got to be able to make the argument that, like, this version of Flash can be someone's favorite out of the Justice League. I feel like if you hit that, then you've really, like, you've got it. You've done what you needed to do for that character and for that movie. And so I think it's possible, definitely, and I have faith that they'll be able to do it. But yeah, it definitely does become very worrying with all of these huge elements that you're bringing into the movie. And then you mentioned Cyborg showing up, which I'm very excited at the prospect of Ray Fisher as Cyborg showing up in this, because one, he was absolutely shafted in the Justice League movie that we saw. He was supposed to be the heart of that movie, and we like barely got any of him, and he's super passionate about the role. So one, it's nice that we're seeing him in Zack's Justice League again. But the one thing that he that was good that we did see from that is like his relationship with the Flash was really cool, and so the fact that they seem to want to explore that relationship more, I think, is great. I said this in a group chat that we're in the other day, but I feel like Cyborg will act as this Flash's cosmic treadmill of sorts until if he eventually makes the cosmic treadmill, because we know from what Zack Snyder has said that like in his version of Justice League, Cyborg is the one who like, along with Flash having access to the Speed Force, like beamed Flash back to warn Batman in the scene that we saw in Batman v Superman. Cyborg like helped him do that and like, you know, set up the coordinates or whatever for putting him in the time stream and stuff. And so I feel like that would be how Cyborg fits into this narrative. For lack of a better word, he's like sort of a MacGuffin himself. And so I think that's kind of his role in it. I would be interested to see how big of a role he plays like besides that. In the Flashpoint comic, he does have a sort of significant role in there. Obviously not nearly as much as Batman, because I mean, and you mentioned it, like Flashpoint is pretty much like Flash and Flashpoint Batman's story through and through. Like they're definitely the two main characters of that arc, and so you're obviously going to have these two that really dominate the screen time ratio. So yeah, you've got like Batman to worry about, and then Cyborg, and then yeah, I obviously would love to see Reverse Flash. I feel like that's, like, you brought up a good point in the fact that you don't, with a story like Flashpoint, you don't need to have a villain in it, but at the same time, like, you kind of want to have a villain in it for the hero to fight against, and to just, it just helps, for lack of a better term, ground things. It just gives you a very clear objective of like, we got to stop him, or like he's the guy that caused this, or just, you know, it just adds another emotional angle to it. And also it would just be very cool to see Reverse Flash in live action. So yeah, I do hope that we see him. But again, yeah, it's just really interesting to think about the way that all these different pieces are going to have to fit together, and how they're going to do it, like what elements they're going to draw from this comic or that comic, and what they're going to change to make this work. Like, it just, I don't know, it's very interesting. I'm not even convinced that, I don't know, because I do think that obviously if Keaton shows up, I feel like Flash is going to be traveling to Burton's Gotham, because I feel like that is how he has to get roped into it. Which one I am going to freak out if we see Burton's Gotham again. But so with that, like, do you spend the movie on that, like in that Gotham or on that Earth, or like you said, do they then jump to this different Earth, which could be the typical Flashpoint Earth where the Atlanteans and Amazonians are fighting? I don't know, because I feel like I don't think that they would do that angle of Flashpoint, just because then you also have like an alternate Wonder Woman and an alternate Aquaman, which you don't have to show them, but you would want to see them, like, if you're going to do that whole conflict. And so I don't think, like, then I would definitely be like, okay, well, this is more a Justice League movie now than it is a Flash movie, which runs into the problem that, you know, you were talking about when we first brought this up. So yeah, I don't know. Or do you like get Keaton and then come right back to the normal Earth? Or like, I don't know. There's just, there's so many factors that go into this, and it's just, it's always so interesting to me how, like, I just love thinking about what the process is whenever these writers and directors are putting these, you know, movies together and be like, okay, we can do this, or we should do that, or, you know, whatever. And it's just very interesting, and I'm excited to see the final product and to see how all these puzzle pieces go together. But Yeah, I to sum it up, I definitely get the apprehension that a lot of Flash fans are feeling. I know a lot of people are just angry in general that they're doing Flashpoint for the first Flash movie, which I get, and I want to see like a Rogue's Flash, like Flash versus like Captain Cold and Heatwave and Mirror Master and stuff. Like I do definitely want to see that, but at the same time, I can't help but be super excited at the fact that by using a version of Flashpoint for this movie, you're opening up so much else for DC films as a whole, and using Flash as the gateway to that. So I'm able to, and also the fact that I'm not a gigantic Flash fan. I'm a big fan of the Flash, but I'm not like a Flash fanboy by any means. So I'm less invested in the fact that we're not getting a more normal, I guess, Flash story like out the gate for him. I'm more like, okay, well, like that's fine. We can do that for his sequels. I'm willing to sacrifice that for the implications that it has for the greater like DC films landscape. But yeah, it's a lot. I get why people are apprehensive about it, but I don't know. I'm still excited.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm still very excited, obviously. I think something that you mentioned, obviously talking about like, obviously we're not in the writer's room, but sort of this idea of how are we going to integrate Burton's Batman, and like, are we going to Burton's Gotham? Are we going to stay on his Earth? Something I know you and I have talked about, and you brought it up the first time you kind of spoke about it, but like, neither one of us pictures Burton's Batman as someone who has his own Justice League, or has in any interaction with like the Speed Force or any of these factors. But it almost feels like, from a storytelling standpoint, that he would need to. Just kind of looking at like very classical tropes, and you know how much I love the hero's journey, but like, if Keaton's Batman is going to be the mentor figure that we're all assuming and the trades are reporting that he is, then he must have some knowledge on what it is that they're facing, or like what's going on, or just any sort of, idea, I guess. You can't have your hero and the mentor figure both not know what's happening, because then you're like, well, how does the plot progress, in a sense? They can discover it together, but that's not your classical way of storytelling. It would be very interesting to see the whole movie take place on Burton's, Earth. I'm not sure if that's going to be the case. Also, you mentioned, obviously having a villain would be great. And, that got me thinking of, by the time Flashpoint came around as an event in the comics and the movie, like, Thawne was established. Like, Reverse Flash is an established character. And, like, you're going to be introducing him to the audiences in this movie if they're using him, which I'm going to assume that they are. So now on top of that, you're not only introducing your villain, but you're introducing another speedster, and like how all that plays into it. Also, like the fact that like he killed Barry's mom, and are those things that are things that are gonna probably need to be addressed. Like, you can't just have Thawne be in the movie and then you're like, oh, by the way, I killed your mom. That just doesn't work. Like, that has to be a plot point, unless you use Zoom instead, which would be interesting. It's just totally a different version of that character, but also like with different motivations. But they changed Zoom up pretty heavily for the CW show. They could probably do it on the movie as well. So it's hard when you're introducing a villain like that without any pretense of, and on top of the whole Flashpoint and everything. But that's a side point. I kind of lost where I was going with this, because you mentioned something towards the end that I wanted to comment on. But regardless, the idea of Keaton's Batman either not knowing enough about the Speed Force or knowing a lot should be interesting. And if they end up on the Flashpoint world, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a cameo from Jason and Gal. I know they'd probably be willing to do it if they decide to go that route. Probably not do the whole storyline, but if you wanted to get a shot of them or whatever. I also think it'd be interesting that like at post Zack's Justice League, obviously that league now is very familiar with each other. And to see how he would react, Ezra being a more comical character, kind of being like, oh man, my friends, you know, sort of like going at it or whatever, and like if he would want to try to resolve that instead of whatever mess he's gotten himself into. The thing is too, and like something that we forget is we don't really know what Ezra's Flash is like, in Zack's mind anyway, and in like the audience, you know, the version that we got in Justice League, other than like Cyborg just getting ripped out of the movie entirely, I feel like Ezra's Flash is probably the character that got changed the most, because he just was the comedic factor, and then Whedon really, you know, not to just completely trash on Whedon here.
Oh, that's fine. We can.
You know, he's not a great person. I guess it's fine.
Yeah, it's totally fine that we just trash on Whedon here.
Yeah, but you know, Whedon took that character and like threw him in the movie more and more and more as like a comedic effect. You know, we didn't really get any of him in BVS at all. You know, we get those 2 scenes, but like we don't see him. You get that one thing of him in Suicide Squad, which like most people forget is even there. So like seeing him in Justice League, or at least Zack's version of Justice League, will give us a better idea of who this character is and like what his attitude is. Like obviously he's going to be a comical character, but to what extent, and also like where is the heart and the seriousness that the rest of the DCEU thrives off of, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a good point. They just have so much that they're gonna have to establish. I don't envy the writers at all here.
Oh, this is horrible. Yeah, it's so bad.
Like, there's so much that they have to do and establish. Yeah, it's so funny because you said something at the end that I was going to comment on, and I thought about the things that I said at the end, and I was going to be like, oh, was it this? And I forgot what I said at the end.
I think it was more about Gal and Jason, so no big deal.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I think that they would definitely be down to, like, be involved. I think that that's a thing, but then that runs the problem of, like, then you're like, that's Wonder Woman and Aquaman now too, so now you're putting like Batman, Wonder Woman, and Aquaman, and these 3 that are very iconic in those roles, like in this movie where Ezra's having to, as you said, like he's got to establish himself. So I think
here's real quick, here's something too, you know, obviously we got a little, I think that this was more Zack from what we've gotten, but like Justice League does set up Barry as, you know, sets up him, his father, the death of his mother, like that stuff is set up in Justice League, which is nice because that's stuff you don't have to go back and try to re-explain too heavily. And then I guess that paves the way a little bit more for Thawne to come in, but I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, no, that's true, and that's good that they have like a little bit of groundwork. It's mainly the character work that they still have to do. Like they have the plot, like some of the essential plot points for Flash are already there, which is good. But yeah, there's just a lot there. I had another point. Yeah, they've got a lot to do. We talked about Reverse Flash. I had something and I lost it. But yeah, no, it's very interesting. I don't envy the writers because I feel like they've got. I feel like this is gonna be a long movie. I feel like you kind of have to make this a long movie, like with everything that you've got to do and establish and work through and then kind of figure out. Yeah, it's I don't know. There's just a lot of factors and variables and possibilities and stuff that I can't wait till we know more. Because like I said this towards the beginning, but we have like pretty much no context for any of this really right now. Like we just know that Keaton. I mean, hell, we've based this whole conversation on the fact that Keaton like will be coming in, and that's still technically not even set in stone yet. Like, I feel like it's going to happen, but it's not guaranteed yet. They've apparently also, there's been people saying that, and rumblings that Christian Bale's Batman will like appear in it, and I feel like that would be nothing more than a cameo. I feel like we'll see him like in the Speed Force while Barry's running, you know, like that type of thing. Which that would just still be cool to see. I would love that. Yeah, I think it's really interesting that, and this is kind of going back to the fact that Keaton is, you said this earlier, that he's obviously been more open to being back in the comic book world. I just think that's such an interesting arc for him, literally like as a person, because, you know, he did the first 2 Batman movies, and then he literally turned down the 3rd Batman movie because he didn't think the script was good enough. And he obviously, you know, walked away from all that. And then Birdman came out in 2014, which was literally a commentary on this actor who played a comic book character, and that became his, like, he was very much tied to that role, and then he was sort of washed up afterwards, and he was trying to put on this theater thing, and it's literally very much a commentary on what being in a sort of role like that does to you and like your career and stuff. And he like did that, which was very interesting, and then he came back and, you know, has obviously played Vulture and will now be in Morbius. So I just think it's really, I don't know, it's kind of cool that to see him just come like all the way around and is now going to be Batman again. I don't know, I just think that's a funny little like thing that you can trace through his career. But I don't know, I don't think, I'm trying to make sure that I've hit all the points that I wanted to with this, but I don't think that I have much more to say on this.
Yeah, I think we hit most of it. When you think about just how many factors there can be to a Flash movie, it becomes overwhelming. And as you said, I don't envy the writer's room whatsoever for this one. You know, this is a tough project. It's probably why it's been through the ringer of, what is it, 4 different directors now, at least?
Yeah, at least. It's had like,
yeah,
God knows how many release dates. Yeah,
I can think of at least 3, and I think I'm missing one. So I think there's been 4 directors. I have to say, you know, I'm really excited to see what Andy Muschietti. I hope I'm not like destroying his name.
That's why I haven't even tried to pronounce
it's all right.
it.
I'll just throw myself on the stake for that one.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm excited to see what he does. I'm not a big horror fan, so I have not seen it. I admit, like those things terrify me.
It's okay.
But, you know, I was really excited when Rick Famuyiwa was on the project. You know, I think that was probably the best director that they had overall attached to the project, and that was still when it was very much a Barry Allen and Cyborg team-up movie. But I'm very excited to see where this whole Flashpoint thing goes. And as someone who, again, is not, you mentioned it a little bit for yourself, but I'm not the biggest Flash fan. I enjoy the character. I enjoyed most of the show before I stopped watching it. He's definitely not like, I'm not a Flash fanboy. To see Flashpoint in any capacity come to life, to see all these different characters, like, that's why I'm going to the theater. You know, I was going to see it anyway. But the concept of seeing all these characters and these worlds interweaving and connecting and expanding the DCEU in this way is super exciting, and that's really what's getting my butt in the seat and popcorn in my lap, and it'll be good to go and experience this movie inevitably when it hopefully releases in 2 years.
Yeah, hopefully. I feel like this is the one. I feel like they're really going to do it this time.
Yeah,
I feel like,
I would say this is probably finally it.
I feel if it doesn't happen this time, it's not happening. But I
You should
feel
have
like
said that after the last 2, and that's how most movies in Hollywood work anyway.
Yeah, but yeah, no, I think this one, I think they've got it. I think they've got a team that's working on it that's very much committed, and they've got obviously now a clear vision that they're going for. So, yeah, I'm excited to see it. I can't wait. It's gonna be, just like I've said 18,000 times already in this podcast, it's gonna be interesting to see how it all comes together. But I guess that's pretty much it for this episode. We covered a lot, I think.
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, Sean, where can people find you on social media?
Oh, well, thank you again for having me on. I appreciate it. This is something we wanted to do for a while, and I'm glad we finally did it. You can find me on all different sorts of platforms. I'm going to plug a lot here. You can find me on Twitter at Real Sean Hussey or at Sean Talks SW for Star Wars. I have a Star Wars YouTube channel, and you can find me on YouTube at Sean Talks Star Wars. You can also find me on Instagram at Sean Hussey Graphic Design. I do graphic design work, as Alex alluded to at the beginning of the podcast with that very kind introduction. You can also check me out at SeanHusseyArt.com.
Nice. Yeah, it's a great graphic designer. Go for him if you need. Go follow him on Instagram. Message him if you need some work done. Also, yeah, go follow his Star Wars account. We got to get those numbers up for him.
I'm no Batman Files, but
hey, man. You're doing a good job. You're like that for Star Wars. Your account's just new. It's okay. But yeah, so go follow him on there. Follow him on all those things, basically. Sean's a great guy. So yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Batman Files if you don't follow me already, which if you're listening to this, I'm assuming that you probably do. But follow me there. You can follow my personal Twitter at AP Batman with 2 T's. You can find me on YouTube at The Bats Cave. I upload new videos every Monday and Friday, and then, as I said at the beginning, I'll be uploading the podcast there again on Wednesdays. So be sure to be on the lookout for that and subscribe on there. If you're listening to this on any of the podcast service, Podbean, Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, please be sure to give it a thumbs up, a like, a star, a review, whatever it is on that service. And if you enjoyed the show, share on whatever social media platform that you prefer would be very much appreciated. And if you've made it this far and listened to all of our ramblings, thank you so much for listening, and be sure to tune in to the next one. Later.